Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Thank you for coming here today. Let me also say assalamu alaikum to everyone here today. Yasmin, thank you so much for that warm introduction. You mentioned that you did not have an analogy for our little excitement on stage, but I actually think you do. Because Yasmin, when you fell, everyone came to help. And that is the story that we have to tell today. When one of us falls, we all have to step up, without regard for our own safety, without knowing what lay behind that curtain. Everyone went to help. When one of us is threatened, we all have to speak out, regardless of the discomfort it may call upon us. When one of us is in harm's way, we're all in harm's way. And that is the story of today's event. And Yasmin, I want to thank you for illustrating that for us today. I could sit down now, but being from the long line of Baptist ministers, you know that I won't. But let me thank all of the faith leaders, all of the community leaders, all of the members of this beautiful mosque who've come together and welcomed me so beautifully this morning. And can we also, once again, just have another hand for all of our children who did so well this morning. They're the reason that we're here. They're the reason that we do this work. And for all of you parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, yes, all your hard work and making them practice paid off, because they are beautiful and they represented you so well. I want to thank all the inspiring faith leaders who spoke before me for their moving words, but most importantly for their commitment, for their recognition that the God that we all share does not see a difference when he looks at us. He just sees his children. And when we hurt, he hurts. And as we saw before, when one of us is hurt, we all have to step in. So let me thank all of you, the faith leaders, the community leaders, the activists who are here, the advocates who are here, for everything that you do all day, every day, to strengthen, to empower all of our communities. Thank you so much. I'm tremendously honored to be here today, to be here in this space, and most importantly, in front of this audience. Because we're all here today in this mosque as men and women of all races, all creeds, all colors. Now, some of us were born in the United States, our immigration status having been resolved some generations ago, but immigrants nonetheless. And some of us came here more recently in search of a better life. We may speak different languages, we may read from different books of scripture, we may call our God by different names, but we all love this country. We all love the ideals for which it stands, and we're all committed to upholding them. We all want our children to lead lives of safety and opportunity, and we all proudly claim the title of American. And as Justice Brandeis proclaimed, we all bear the most important political office there is, that of private citizen. That is our strength. That is our bond. We are all together in this. And here, today, I see a living expression of the American promise, a living picture of America, the conviction that every person's dignity is inherent and is equal. Now, we know that that promise is as old as our nation itself. 240 years ago, 2 centuries and 2 years, our forefathers boldly proclaimed that all men are created equal. And of course, when those words were written, they had a ways to go, because there was a gap between America's founding ideals and America's founding reality, because the very hand that put those words on parchment had also signed deeds for the sale and purchase of other human beings. And for many of our ancestors, for women, for African Americans, for Native Americans, for all immigrants and countless others, the promise of American life rang hollow for far too long. But those words, clear and plain as they were too powerful. They were too self-evident, in Jefferson's words, for that state of affairs to endure, because generation after generation of Americans heard that promise. They read those words. They took them to heart, and they demanded that they be fulfilled. And they stood up, women who endured ridicule and condescension just for seeking the right to vote, African-American soldiers who defended freedom overseas only to return home to a nation that would not let them vote, and that sometimes even repaid their service with violence. The marchers who braved the jaws of police dogs in Birmingham and the cattle prize at Selma, the LGBT individuals who fought for their civil rights at Stonewall Inn. All of these are examples of courage and determination of these individuals and countless others who've come before us, but they also illustrate the great truth that every generation must keep this battle anew. Every generation must push this country ever forward to fulfill those promises. Now, we have built a society that is so much further along, that so much more fully reflects our founding creeds of liberty and justice for all. But our work is not finished. We have been challenged on these and so many other fronts. As we are all aware, this work is never finished. Now, as we've talked about, just last month, the FBI released its statistics on the number of hate crimes committed in 2015. That's not even this year. And already we see the disturbing trend, the sobering indication of how much more work remains to be done. Now, overall, the number of reported hate crimes increased 6% from 2014, and that figure includes increases in hate crimes committed against Jewish Americans, African Americans, LGBT Americans, but perhaps most troublingly of all, it showed a 67% increase in hate crimes committed against Muslim Americans. This is the highest total of anti-Muslim incidents since 2001, when 9/11 itself spurred so many reprehensible acts. And we know that there are many more hate crimes in communities, in all communities across this country, that go unreported. And what we also know is that it's easy to talk about the numbers and the statistics, and the report is out. But behind every number is a person. Behind every statistic is someone whose rights have been violated. Behind the pages of the reports lie communities who are now more afraid than before, and more afraid than any American should ever feel. And all of us have seen the recent flurry of news reports about hate crimes and harassment. We have seen the stories where hijabs have been yanked off of women's heads, literally off of women's heads, to the swastikas that are sprayed on the sides of synagogues, to the slurs and the epithets that are hurled in classrooms, the story that was told about the young boy who was told he would no longer have a friend or a place in this country. That's what's behind all of those numbers. And I say to you again, when one of us is threatened, all of us are threatened. When one of us falls, we all have to help. That is our obligation. That is our commitment. That's the pledge we've all made as citizens. And the Department of Justice is working on these issues. Our FBI is working with local authorities to review multiple incidents. Our agents and prosecutors are working to assess whether their cases constitute violations of federal law, but we will provide our support nonetheless. Because these statistics, these numbers, and more importantly, the people behind them, should be of concern to every American, regardless of faith, regardless of background, regardless of whether you are involved or not. Because hate crimes target more than just the individual at that time. They target the fabric of our communities. They also stain our dearest ideals. They stain our nation's very soul. There is a thread It is pernicious, but it is strong. There is a thread that connects the act of violence against a woman wearing a hijab to the assault on a transgender man, to the tragic deaths of 9 innocent African Americans during Bible study at Mother Emanuel in Charleston. There is a thread that links all of those. And when one of us is threatened, all of us are threatened. When one of us falls, we all must step in. As President Obama has said, it is the moment that we fail to see in another our common humanity, the very moment when we fail to recognize in a person the same hopes and fears, the same passions and imperfections, the same dreams that we all share. That's the moment that we see. That's what's illustrated by this thread that runs through all of these issues. And the reason why we have so many people here today, such a beautiful cross-section of this wonderful community, leaders from so many different faiths, people who work in so many different areas, is because we all believe so deeply in certain common values. Regardless of our faith, regardless of how we denominate that faith, what we call ourselves, we all believe that we must treat others as we would wish to be treated. Regardless of the name of our denomination or our faith, we believe that every individual is precious. Regardless of the title over the church or synagogue or mosque or house of worship that we attend, we believe in our common humanity. And we all believe that, in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's why the Department of Justice, which I am so proud to lead, and the entire Obama administration regards hate crimes with the utmost seriousness, whether they target individuals because of their race, their religion, their gender, or their sexual orientation. And that is why we have worked so tirelessly over the last several years to bring those who perpetrate these heinous deeds to justice. That is our function. But we look beyond just the walls of our own building, out into the community, because when one of us falls, we all must step up. Now, a cornerstone of our work, of course, is investigating and prosecuting hate crimes against Muslim Americans, as well as those perceived to be Muslim. It was, of course, after 9/11, the first individual to be targeted in a perceived Muslim attack was, in fact, a Sikh individual in the Southwest. Muslim Americans, Sikh Americans, Hindu Americans, all practitioners of all faiths, you are our friends, you're our family members. The history of African Americans in this country is, of course, a history of Muslim Americans. We have our Muslim American friends, neighbors, doctors, nurses, police officers, our firefighters, our business owners, our teachers. Thousands of Muslim Americans have fought under the flag that we all pledged allegiance to today. Thousands of them. Thousands have made the ultimate sacrifice to that flag. Because when they pledged their allegiance to the republic for which it stands, they knew that it might call on them to lay down their life, and they did so for all of us. For all of us. And yet, too often, especially in this last year, especially following a number of tragic terrorist incidents and amidst an increase in some of the most divisive and fearful rhetoric we have seen in years, we've seen Muslim Americans targeted. We've seen them demonized simply because of their faith. Of their faith. Of how people choose to worship a loving and merciful God. And I have to say to you, it is clear, my friends, to invoke a blanket stereotype, to characterize any members of any faith because of the actions of some who pervert that faith, is to take our nation backwards. It's to go backwards in our thought. It's to go backwards in our discourse. And in fact, it is to insult, it is to repudiate those who founded this great country. What is our First Amendment? The very first one. It guarantees the freedom of religion in that first clause. That's how we came to be, and that's what we have to remember. And that's why the Department of Justice has moved to prosecute the actions that are demonstrated by this ignorance and by this fear and by this hatred. And that's why I'm so pleased that Benita Gupta is here with me today. She leads the Civil Rights Department, an outstanding group of dedicated professionals who have given most of their time. They work all day and well into the night, defending the rights of every American. I'm also so pleased that my U.S. Attorney from Eastern Virginia, Dana Bente, is here, because Dana and so many other U.S. attorneys work with the Civil Rights Division to defend the rights of all Americans, but particularly where we are seeing this increase in hate crimes. The Civil Rights Division has recently convicted a Connecticut man for firing a high-powered rifle at a mosque, shooting at a house of worship. How un-American is that? We've recently convicted a Florida man for threatening to firebomb 2 mosques and to shoot their congregants. A Missouri man for the arson of a local mosque there, and a North Carolina man, sadly from my own home state, who yelled at a young woman and tore off her hijab on an airplane, where she had every right to be. And in October, our National Security Division charged 3 men in connection with their plot to detonate bombs at an apartment complex in Garden City, Kansas, which included a mosque, where many members of the local Somali immigrant community gather regularly to pray. Now, these are just a few examples of the Justice Department's recent prosecutions. And while we are tremendously proud to do this work and uphold these values, our greatest wish is that they had never occurred. That is, of course, what we have to work on. But there are so many other matters that we, in close partnership with our state and local law enforcement partners, are still investigating. One area that is of great importance to us is our work to protect the rights of religious communities to build houses of worship without unlawful interference or harassment. Just the right to build a house of worship, a place to come together to pray and to honor God. But unfortunately, that task of protecting this right has become more urgent in recent years. Members of the Civil Rights Division have heard repeatedly about more overt discrimination in both the tone and the framing of objections to planned religious institutions, especially mosques and Islamic centers. Now, our primary tool to combat such discrimination is a statute that we've used repeatedly. It's called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. It's called RLUIPA for short. And since September of 2010, that's just in the last 6 years, we have opened 50 RLUIPA land use investigations. We have filed 10 lawsuits involving land use, and we have filed 8 amicus briefs in private parties' RLUIPA cases to inform the courts about the law's provisions and its requirements. And in the last 6 years, 38% of the Civil Rights Division's RLUIPA land use cases involved mosques or Islamic schools. 38%. This is a dramatic increase in the percentage of those cases brought during the previous decade. Now, of course, we all know that religious institutions are not the only vulnerable spaces that we are determined to keep free of hatred and bias. Because we all know, in order for our children to learn and thrive, in order for them to do what they did so beautifully here today, they need access to safe and inclusive classrooms. Earlier this year, the Civil Rights Division launched a new initiative with our U.S. Attorney's offices, and that will significantly advance our ability to address religious discrimination in schools. Because the place where you go to school should be a place where our children's minds are opened to other ways of thinking, are opened to different religions, are opened to different cultures, not closed off and made to learn to hate other children. Now, I'm also so pleased that the head of my Community Relations Service, or CRS, Paul Montero, is here today. Paul and the CRS work so hard to ease tensions and promote understanding in communities and schools that have been rocked by traumatic incidents. They go in, not to do an investigation, but to help people heal, literally. And just by way of one example, after a young woman was allegedly forced to remove her hijab in school in Massachusetts, the school actually invited CRS to come in, to work with them, to present its Arab, Muslim, and Sikh cultural awareness program to the school's staff, so they could better handle such situations in the future. We also, through CRS, has just appointed its first ever national program manager for Muslim, Arab, Sikh, and South Asian communities. And I'm so pleased that Harpreet Singh Mocha has joined us here today. Thank you for taking on this task. Now, of course, we're also concerned about the crimes against our LGBT brothers and sisters. In October, we commemorated the 7th anniversary of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which expanded the federal definition of hate crimes to include crimes based on gender, disability, gender identity, and sexual orientation. And here, too, we've been active. We have been active using this tool. We've brought a number of hate crimes cases in states around the country. And I'm actually traveling to New York tomorrow to meet with LGBT youth to reaffirm the Department of Justice's steadfast commitment to the rights and the well-being of all Americans, including our LGBT family members. Now, these are all important efforts. We are so proud to carry them out. Their impact has actually been amplified by the outstanding partnership we have with our local law enforcement agencies, from state attorneys general to sheriffs to police departments across this country. And our efforts to work with them in training our local and federal agencies in how to recognize and investigate hate crimes, how to engage with communities, and how to better encourage hate crimes reporting and data collection. And all of these initiatives have helped us tremendously to forge the partnerships I just referenced, which are so important in bringing the community's needs to the fore. The partnership between law enforcement and the communities that we serve. And I'm not only hopeful, I know that these partnerships will serve as a bulwark against hate crimes for years to come. Now, I am so encouraged by what we've accomplished together over the last 8 years. A few points I've been proud to mention today. But I also know, I know that we face challenges in the years ahead. We face challenges that will require the Department of Justice to remain an active force for good in communities from coast to coast. Our federal hate crimes laws are among the most powerful tools we have for creating a more just and a more equal nation. And career Justice Department prosecutors will continue to enforce them. We will be here. The career minimum of the department will be here. But we also need all of you. We need you to be our eyes and ears. We need you to raise issues to the fore. We need you to work in partnership with us. Because I know that so many Americans are feeling uncertainty, are feeling anxiety, are feeling fear, frankly, as we witness this recent eruption of divisive rhetoric, as we note the hateful deeds that we've been talking about. And I know that many Americans are wondering, are they in danger simply because of the way they look or where they pray? And I know that some are also wondering if the progress that we have made at such great cost and over so many years is in danger of sliding backwards. I understand all these feelings. I see all of that when I meet with groups and I travel the community. And I also know that as we continue to demand a nation where all people are treated equally and fairly, we will be met with prejudice, bigotry, and condemnation. That is also a sad part of our history. But I also know that we have come, as we say in my church, a mighty long way. And there was nothing preordained about it. There was nothing guaranteed about our march toward a more just and peaceful future, and there never have been guarantees. This has always been hard. It always has been hard. Our centuries-long project, this wonderful experiment in democracy that we are all in the midst of, our goal of creating a more perfect union, that's not fate. That's not destiny. That is the result of countless individuals, some well-known, some whose names we will never know, some famous, some invisible. They all made the choice to stand up, to demand recognition, to refuse to rest, until they knew that their children would inherit a nation that was more tolerant, more inclusive, and more equal. Ordinary people just like all of you here today. They were the ones who made the progress that we celebrate. They were the ones who gave us the examples that we use in the cases that we make. And that's why it is so fitting that we're here today in this beautiful house of worship, this place of deep and fundamental faith, because it has been the faith that has sustained this fight since the beginning. Faith that a small upstart colony could take on the greatest power in the world and build a new country founded on freedom and equality. Faith that this new nation could in fact survive the original sin that it never resolved and survive a divisive and bloody civil war. Faith that it could in fact overcome that and live up to its ideals. And not just faith, but the works that made that faith reality is what we celebrate here today. And that's what it gives us the courage to move on when there is no guarantee of success. That has been the harbinger of every movement in this country. People throwing themselves into the fight without a guarantee, but simply the knowledge that they were working towards what is right. And I think of examples even from my own life. 2 members of my own family who also happen to be faith leaders. I think of them often, my grandfather and my father, because they both lived in the southern part of this country at a time when this country regarded them as less than fully human, simply because of the color of their skin. And they both did their part to make this country a little bit more free and a little bit more fair, but they had no idea how it would turn out. My grandfather was a preacher and a sharecropper in 1930s North Carolina, where in the middle of the night on a dark road, there were no equal rights, there were no Miranda rights, there was no equal protection. And he used to hide neighbors who were in trouble with the law under the floorboards of his home until they could leave the state to safety. And a generation later, my own father, who had seen this, would let civil rights groups use the basement of his Greensboro, North Carolina church to organize sit-ins and protests at North Carolina with the students at A&T. Neither one of them knew the results of those actions. Both of them lived in fear for the possible consequences. And they were acts of enormous courage, but also in acts of enormous faith and hope. Because there were 2 men living in a country that even years apart still put obstacles in the way of them from even voting or living their lives, that told them they couldn't use certain drinking fountains, that told them when the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, it wasn't referring to them. And that's just their experience. There are so many other groups who have had those same words thrown in their faces as well. But my father and my grandfather knew what those words meant. They chose to act accordingly. They knew their portion of fear, they knew their portion of anger, but they also never lost their hope that although this country was far from perfect, it was certainly capable of doing much better. And they both risked a great deal for that, never knowing how it would turn out, never imagining that the daughter of one and the granddaughter of the other would one day be the chief law enforcement officer of this country. And my friends, that hope is still alive in this country. That faith is still here in this country. That ability to face incredible odds with nothing but the desire and the knowledge that you are entitled to the rights of every American is still in this country. Because you and I know that when the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, it means us. It does mean us. And you and I know that when the Constitution says we the people, it means us. And that's the strength of this country and the backbone of this country. And so as we leave here today, united in the knowledge that those are our words, these are our ideals, this is our fight, let us leave here united in our confidence, inspired by our faith and strengthened by our courage. Let us all leave here with a renewed commitment to demanding nothing less than a country that is true to its founding promises, and let us leave here in faith and in hope. The same faith and hope that has brought this country so far, 2 centuries and 20 years, and it will carry us even further. Now, is it going to be hard? Yes. It's always been hard. Will there be challenges ahead? We have always known that the price of freedom is constant vigilance. We have to work to maintain not just the gains, but to make advances. But of course the question, particularly in these times of concern and anxiety, I know, the question is, will we persevere? Will we succeed? We always have. We have moved this country forward bit by bit, day by day, right by right. From where will we get the strength? Allow me to quote from a spiritual from my faith, made famous by the late Mahalia Jackson. She used to sing, "Lord, don't move this mountain, but give me the strength to climb." That call to a greater power. That call to the faith that is recognized by all people here today. That call to persevere, no matter how high that mountain looks. We have accomplished so much, but there is so much more to do. But that's what we do. That's what we do as Americans. That's what we do as people of faith. That's what we do as people of hope. We keep moving. We push forward. So let me thank you for letting me spend just a few minutes with you today to talk about the country that we all love and the future that we all cherish, but the work that we all have to do. But thank you also for all that you are already doing in your congregations, in your communities, in your homes, in your classrooms, to vindicate the promise of American life. Now, my time as the Attorney General is coming to a close, but to everything there's a season. But the work does not stop. And I pledge to you that my commitment to these values and these ideals in this work will not stop. I will continue to stand beside you in the cause of liberty and justice for all, sharing with you what Justice Brandeis said is the highest office in the land, that of private citizen, and the most powerful. Thank you so very much.